The crystal chandeliers of the Hartwell Grand Ballroom cast fractured light across hundreds of faces I no longer recognized. My fingers trembled as I adjusted the empire waist dress I'd chosen specifically to conceal the 7-month curve of my belly, the deep emerald fabric pooling around my swollen ankles in a way that might have looked elegant if I weren't so achingly aware of how much I'd changed. The charity gala hummed with the particular frequency of old money and older secrets, a world I'd once moved through with Julian's hand at the small of my back when I believed love meant being seen. Now I preferred invisibility. I pressed closer to the marble column near the silent auction tables, my sketchbook clutched against my chest like armor. Attending tonight had been Mira's idea. You can't hide forever, Serena. Your illustrations are featured in half these donors' homes. Show your face, make connections, leave before anyone asks questions. Sound advice from my best friend, who'd held my hair back during morning sickness and never once asked me to name the father. But Mira didn't understand that some ghosts couldn't be outrun, especially not in a room where Julian's family crest hung above the bar in hammered gold. The baby kicked, a sharp jab beneath my ribs that made me gasp softly. I placed my palm over the spot, feeling her settle. This impossible miracle I'd created with a man whose real name I'd learned only from newspaper headlines weeks after our night together. Nikolai Machado, the Shadow King of the Underworld. The article had included a grainy photo of him leaving a courthouse, his face all hard angles and controlled fury. So different from the man who'd traced my tears with calloused thumbs and whispered Russian endearments I still didn't understand. I'd run the morning after, leaving nothing but a sketch I'd drawn of his sleeping profile on hotel stationery. Cowardice, perhaps. Or survival instinct. Serena? Serena Frere? Is that really you? The voice sliced through my carefully constructed piece like a blade through silk. I turned slowly, knowing exactly who I'd find, my body already tensing with the muscle memory of old wounds. Julian stood 3 feet away, champagne flute dangling from fingers that had once promised me forever, his tailored tuxedo emphasizing the athletic build he maintained through personal trainers I'd never been able to afford. Beside him, a woman in crimson silk pressed against his side with the confidence of legitimacy, her diamond engagement ring catching the light in a way my simple band never had. Julian. My voice came out steadier than I felt, years of swallowing pain finally serving some purpose. It's been a while. 8 months. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Those pale blue depths I'd once found captivating now, just cold. You've been scarce. His gaze traveled down my body with the practiced assessment of someone cataloging damage, and I saw the exact moment he registered the changes. The fuller face, the softer edges, the strategic draping of my dress. Life's been treating you differently, I see. The woman at his side tittered, a sound like breaking glass. Jules, darling, who's this? An old friend. He emphasized the word with surgical precision, erasing 2 years of shared meals and whispered futures with clinical efficiency. Serena used to be quite the society fixture before she decided to pursue her little art hobby full-time. We were close once, weren't we, Serena? I felt rather than saw the small crowd beginning to gather, drawn by the particular cruelty in Julian's tone like sharks to blood and water. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. I remember things differently. Of course you do. He laughed, and several people nearby joined in, that pack mentality of the wealthy when they sensed entertainment at someone else's expense. You always had such creative interpretations of reality. That's what makes you good at children's book illustrations, I suppose. Fantasy suits you better than truth ever did. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if she could sense my distress. I shifted my weight, trying to ease the pressure on my lower back while maintaining some semblance of dignity. Julian's eyes tracked the movement with the focus of a predator who'd spotted weakness. Honestly, though, he continued, his voice rising just enough to ensure our expanding audience caught every word. I barely recognized you. You used to be pretty, Serena. Really striking. Remember how people used to turn their heads when we walked into a room? He gestured vaguely at my face, my body, my existence. What happened? Did you just give up? The words landed like physical blows, each one finding the soft places I'd tried to protect. Around us I heard murmurs, saw phones being subtly angled toward us, capturing my humiliation for social media posterity. The woman in crimson looked me up and down with undisguised pity, her manicured hand squeezing Julian's arm in a gesture of support that made my stomach turn. I should have left then, should have turned and walked away with whatever scraps of dignity remained. But something in me, maybe the hormones, maybe the accumulated weight of 7 months of hiding, maybe the memory of a night when someone had looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing in the world, refused to crumble. I found better things to care about than your approval, Julian. My hand moved unconsciously to my belly, a protective gesture I realized too late would reveal exactly what those better things were. Some of us grow up. Some of us just grow cruel. His eyes followed my hand, and I watched understanding dawn across his features, followed immediately by malicious glee. Oh, Serena, you're not... He laughed again, louder this time, making sure everyone heard. Is that why you've been hiding? You got yourself knocked up? Who's the father? Did he at least stick around? Or were you not worth keeping for him either? The crowd had gone silent now. Dozens of eyes fixed on us with the hungry attention reality television had trained people to crave. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall. Refused to give Julian or any of these people the satisfaction of seeing me break. My throat tightened around words I couldn't form, defenses I couldn't build fast enough. That's enough. The voice came from behind me, deep and cold and absolutely familiar. The crowd parted like water, and I didn't need to turn to know who stood there, though my body did anyway, pivoting with the inevitability of a compass finding north. Nikolai Machado materialized from the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos, as if the shadows themselves had birthed him into the light, his presence so commanding that the ballroom seemed to shrink around him. He wore black, because of course he did, the suit tailored to emphasize shoulders broad enough to carry empires or crush them. His dark hair was swept back from a face that cameras never quite captured correctly. They couldn't convey the intensity of his gaze, the way those storm-gray eyes could strip away pretense and see straight through to bone and truth. At 35, he moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd learned early that violence was most effective when it remained potential rather than kinetic. Behind him, I recognized Viriato, his head of security, a mountain of a man whose expression promised consequences. But it was Nikolai who held my attention. Nikolai whose eyes found mine with recognition that sent electricity down my spine. Nikolai whose jaw tightened as his gaze dropped to my belly and stayed there. Mr. Machado. Julian's voice had lost its edge, replaced by the careful neutrality of someone who'd just realized they were standing too close to a cliff. I didn't know you were attending tonight. Nikolai didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he moved to my side, his hand settling at the small of my back with a possessiveness that made my breath catch. His touch was gentle, reverent even, but the message it sent to everyone watching was unmistakable. Mine. Serena. My name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a claim all at once, his slight Russian accent curling around the syllables. You should have told me you were coming tonight. I would have arranged for proper security. I stared at him, unable to form words. We hadn't spoken since that night 3 months ago, the night I'd fled his hotel room like Cinderella from a very different kind of ball. The night I'd convinced myself that a man like him, dangerous, powerful, moving through worlds I'd never understand, couldn't possibly want the complication of me, let alone the child we'd created. The night I'd been catastrophically wrong. You know each other? Julian's question came out strangled, confusion and dawning horror warring across his face. Nikolai's hand moved from my back to my waist, his thumb tracing small circles against the fabric of my dress, in a gesture so intimate it made several onlookers gasp. Know each other? His smile was a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. Mr. Castro, allow me to clarify the situation. This woman, the one you just publicly humiliated, carries my child, which makes your comments not just offensive, but personally insulting to me. The color drained from Julian's face. Around us, phones were definitely recording now, capturing the moment Julian Castro learned he'd made an enemy of the most dangerous man in the city. The woman in crimson had already stepped away from him, her survival instincts sharper than her fiancé's. I had no idea, Julian stammered, but Nikolai cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. You humiliated her because you thought she was alone, unprotected, fair game for your small cruelties. Nikolai's voice remained conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. Men like you only show courage when you believe there will be no consequences. But there are always consequences, Mr. Castro. Always. He turned to me then, his expression softening in a way that made my heart stutter. Come, Solnishko, you've wasted enough time in this place. The Russian endearment, little son, fell from his lips with such casual intimacy that fresh whispers erupted around us. I should have questioned him, demanded explanations, refused to be claimed like some prize in a territorial dispute. But the baby kicked again, and Nikolai's hand moved to cover mine where it rested on my belly. And suddenly I was so tired of being strong alone, so exhausted from carrying fear and shame and love for this child without anyone to share the weight. Okay, I whispered, and let him guide me through the crowd. As we moved toward the exit, I heard Julian call my name, heard desperation replace his earlier cruelty. But Nikolai didn't stop, didn't even slow, his hand steady at my waist as Viriato fell into step behind us, a wall of protection between me and the ballroom full of vultures. The November air hit me like a slap when we emerged onto the street, cold enough to make me shiver despite my coat. A black Mercedes idled at the curb, and Nikolai opened the door himself, helping me inside with a care that seemed at odds with everything I'd read about him in those articles. He slid in beside me, and suddenly the spacious back seat felt impossibly small, the scent of his cologne, cedar and something darker, more complex, surrounding me like a memory I'd tried to forget. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, and I watched the Hartwell Grand Ballroom disappear in the side mirror, along with the last remnants of the life I'd tried to build without him. How did you know I was there? My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, small and uncertain. Nikolai's jaw tightened. I've known where you were for the last 2 months, Serena. Since the day I discovered you'd left my hotel room and vanished like smoke. His eyes found mine in the dim interior. Did you really think I wouldn't look for you? That I wouldn't find you? I faltered, suddenly uncertain of everything I'd convinced myself was true. I thought you wouldn't want a child? His hand found my belly again, palm spreading wide over the curve with a reverence that made tears finally spill down my cheeks. My child? Bože moi, Serena. What kind of man do you think I am? I don't know what kind of man you are, I admitted, the truth raw and painful. I only know what I've read, what people say. And none of it suggested you'd want a kindergarten teacher's daughter in your life, let alone pregnant with your baby. His laugh was harsh, bitter. What people say. What they write in their papers and whisper in their clubs. They know nothing, Solnishko. Nothing that matters. He leaned closer, his hand still on my belly, his eyes searching mine. I have spent 3 months looking for you. 3 months wondering if you were safe, if you needed anything, if our child was healthy. 3 months going slowly mad with not knowing. I was protecting her, I whispered. Protecting us both. From me? From your world. He was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles over my dress. When he spoke again, his voice had gentled. My world is dangerous, yes. But do you know what's more dangerous? Leaving you unprotected in a city full of jackals like Julian Castro. Letting you struggle alone when you carry something precious to me. The car turned onto a tree-lined street I didn't recognize, the houses growing larger and more isolated as we drove. My heart hammered against my ribs. Where are we going? Home, Nikolai said simply. Your apartment is adequate for one person, but not for a pregnant woman in her 3rd trimester. Certainly not for my child. You can't just... I can. His voice was gentle but implacable. I will. You can fight me if you wish, Serena. But know that I will win, because I have resources you cannot imagine, and a determination you cannot comprehend. Or... He tilted my chin up with one finger, forcing me to meet his eyes. You can trust that everything I do to protect what's mine. I'm not yours, I said, but even I could hear how weak the protest sounded. His smile was slow, dangerous, infinitely possessive. Aren't you? You've been mine since the moment you let me touch you, Solnishko. Since before that, perhaps. Since you looked at me across that hotel bar with tears in your eyes, and I knew I would destroy anyone who'd put them there. The car stopped in front of a mansion that looked like it had been stolen from a European postcard, all stone and tall windows and manicured grounds. Nikolai exited first, then held out his hand to help me from the car, his grip steady as I navigated the step in my condition. Welcome home, he said, and I realized with dawning certainty that my carefully constructed life of hiding had just ended. Whether that was salvation or destruction, only time would tell. The mansion swallowed me whole. That's how it felt as Nikolai guided me through doors that whispered open on well-oiled hinges, past rooms larger than my entire apartment, up a sweeping staircase of dark wood and wrought iron that curved like a question mark toward the 2nd floor. His hand never left the small of my back, that possessive touch both steadying and unnerving, a constant reminder that I'd somehow stepped from my carefully controlled world into his. A world where men like Julian Castro paled at the mention of a name, where security cameras tracked our progress through hallways lined with art I recognized from museum catalogs. This is too much, I managed as we reached the landing. My breathing labored from the climb. The baby pressed against my ribs in protest, and I paused. One hand braced against the banister. Nikolai stopped immediately, concern flickering across his features. Are you in pain? Should I call Dr. Mora? You have a doctor on call? The question came out sharper than intended, fear making me defensive. I have everything on call, Solnishko. He moved closer, his hand finding my elbow with surprising gentleness. Medical staff, security, whatever you or our daughter might need. But right now I'm asking if you're all right. Our daughter. The casual possessiveness of the words should have angered me, but instead, I felt something dangerous unfurling in my chest. Relief, maybe, or the seductive promise of not being alone anymore. I'd carried this secret for 7 months, borne the weight of fear and joy and terror, without anyone to share it with except Mira, whose love was fierce but whose understanding of what it meant to create life with a man like Nikolai Machado was necessarily limited. I'm fine, I said, which was only partially true. Just tired, and confused, and honestly terrified of whatever this is. I gestured vaguely at the opulence surrounding us, at him, at the impossible situation we'd found ourselves in. His jaw tightened, that muscle I'd sketched from memory 100 times ticking with suppressed emotion. Let me show you to your room. We can talk after you've rested. Your room. Not our room. The distinction settled something anxious in my chest, even as it created a new kind of uncertainty. What exactly did Nikolai expect from this arrangement? What did I want him to expect? He led me down a hallway where soft lighting created pools of shadow and gold, past closed doors that hinted at mysteries I wasn't ready to explore. At the end of the corridor, he opened a door to reveal a suite that made my breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens silvered by moonlight, while inside, a massive bed draped in cream and gray linens dominated the space. But it was the corner that made tears prick my eyes again. A rocking chair positioned near the windows, and beside it, a bassinet carved from dark wood with such intricate detail it could only have been custom-made. When? The word came out broken. 2 weeks ago. Nikolai moved to the bassinet, his large hand trailing over the carved roses that decorated its sides. When I finally confirmed your location, I had everything prepared, hoping that when I brought you home, you would stay. You were that certain? His eyes found mine, storm gray and absolutely sure. I was that determined. I moved to the rocking chair, lowering myself into it with the careful maneuvering late pregnancy demanded, my hand automatically going to my belly, where the baby had started a lazy rolling motion that suggested she was settling in for the night. The chair was perfectly balanced, moving with the slightest pressure, and I realized he'd chosen it specifically for comfort, for function, for the reality of what was coming. I need answers, Nikolai. I forced myself to meet his gaze despite the tears now flowing freely down my cheeks. I need to understand what you want from me. From us. He crossed the room, kneeling before the rocking chair so we were eye level, his hands coming to rest on the armrests, caging me in without touching. What I want, he said slowly, as if choosing each word with care, is for you to be safe, for our daughter to be protected, for you both to want for nothing. And in exchange? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. You think I'm negotiating? Bartering your safety for something you owe me? Aren't you? I challenged, even as my voice shook. Men like you don't give without expecting something in return. Men like me. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know nothing about men like me, Serena. If you did, you would understand that what I want cannot be negotiated or bought or traded. What I want is already mine. Has been since the moment you let me kiss away your tears in that hotel bar. I'm not property. No, he interrupted, his voice going soft and deadly. You're far more dangerous than property. You're the woman who saw me, really saw me, when I wasn't wearing my armor. The woman who drew my face while I slept like I was something worth studying instead of something to fear. The woman carrying the only thing in this world that could destroy me completely. His hand moved then, covering mine where it rested on my belly, our fingers intertwining over the curve of our daughter. I want you to stay because you choose to. Because you trust that I will protect you both with everything I have and everything I am. Because you understand that leaving was your choice, but staying, that's a choice I'm asking you to make freely. And if I choose to leave? The muscle in his jaw ticked again. Then I will have Viriato drive you wherever you wish to go. I will ensure you have resources, protection, everything you need. But know this, Solnishko. I will not stop trying to change your mind. I will not give up my right to be our daughter's father. And I will not tolerate anyone, including Julian Castro, treating you with anything less than the respect you deserve. The certainty in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it settled something raw and aching in my chest. That part of me that had been braced for rejection since the moment I saw the positive pregnancy test. I'd convinced myself that a man like Nikolai wouldn't want the complication. Wouldn't see value in a kindergarten teacher's daughter who drew pictures for children's books and cried at romantic comedies. I'd been protecting myself from imagined rejection, while he'd been searching for me with the single-minded focus that had built his empire. I'm tired, I whispered, which was both truth and deflection. Nikolai stood, his hand trailing along my jaw in a gesture so tender it stole my breath. Sleep. We have time to figure this out. He moved toward the door, then paused. There's a phone on the nightstand. Press 1 for the kitchen if you need food, 2 for Dr. Mora, 3 for me. Viriato is stationed outside your door, and there are cameras throughout the property, but none in this room. Your privacy is yours, Serena. Always. After he left, I sat in the rocking chair for a long time, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the floor, feeling my daughter move beneath my hands. The bassinet waited in the corner, ready for a life I hadn't planned, but could no longer imagine giving up. Sleep came fitfully, plagued by dreams of Julian's cruel laughter and Nikolai's storm-gray eyes, of ballrooms that transformed into prisons and mansions that felt like sanctuaries. I woke near dawn to find a tray outside my door, fresh fruit, yogurt, whole-grain toast, exactly the kind of breakfast my pregnancy books recommended. A note in bold, masculine handwriting read simply, "Eat. N." The following days settled into a strange rhythm. Nikolai disappeared each morning in tailored suits and an aura of controlled menace, handling whatever business kept a man like him in power. But he returned every evening by 6, joining me for dinner in a formal dining room I'd convinced him to abandon in favor of a smaller breakfast nook that felt less like a museum. We talked, carefully at first, dancing around the dangerous topics: his work, my fears, the night we'd created our daughter. He asked about my illustrations, and I found myself showing him my portfolio on my tablet, watching his face soften as he studied the whimsical characters I created for children's books. He particularly loved a series I'd done about a lonely dragon who learned to make friends, his finger tracing the dragon's expression with surprising gentleness. "You see beauty in unexpected places," he observed one evening, 4 days into my residence in his mansion. We sat in the library, a room lined floor to ceiling with books in multiple languages, while rain drummed against the windows. Even creatures others fear. "Maybe I just understand what it's like to be misunderstood," I said, then immediately regretted the honesty. But Nikolai only smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his face from austere to almost beautiful. "Is that what you think? That I'm misunderstood? I think you're more complicated than the newspapers suggest." "The newspapers know nothing," he said, echoing his words from the car. "They report what I allow them to see. The mergers, the acquisitions, the occasional scandal. They don't report the truth." "Which is?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked windows. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "That everything I built, every empire I claimed, every enemy I destroyed, it was all to ensure that no one could ever make me powerless again. That no one could take what matters to me." What happened? My father was a good man in a bad world. He tried to run an honest shipping business in a city controlled by corrupt officials and criminal syndicates. They gave him a choice: join them or be destroyed. He refused. Nikolai's hands clenched on the armrests of his chair. "They killed him in front of my mother and me when I was 12. Made it look like a robbery. The police never investigated. The judges never cared. Because men with power had decided my father was expendable." Horror settled in my stomach like ice. "Nikolai, I swore that day I would never be powerless again. Never let anyone I loved be vulnerable to men who think cruelty is their right." His eyes found mine, fierce and burning. "So yes, Serena, I built an empire. I played their game and I won it so completely that now they fear me the way I once feared them. The newspapers call me dangerous. They're right. But everything I've done, every line I've crossed, was to ensure that what happened to my father could never happen to anyone I protect." The revelation hung between us, heavy with implications. I understood then that Nikolai's need to control, to protect, to claim, it all stemmed from that 12-year-old boy who'd watched his father die. It didn't excuse everything, but it explained the intensity, the single-minded focus, the fury in his eyes when Julian had humiliated me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't be sorry. Be safe. Be here. Let me protect you and our daughter the way I couldn't protect him." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "I have to take this." He stepped into the hallway, but his voice carried back to me in sharp Russian syllables that needed no translation. Anger, authority, threat. When he returned, the vulnerable man who'd shared his past had vanished, replaced by the controlled predator I'd seen at the gala. "What's wrong?" "Julian Castro has been making inquiries." Nikolai's voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow made it more frightening. "Trying to discover your location, telling people you're in danger, that I've kidnapped you." My blood went cold. Why would he do that? Because men like Castro cannot tolerate losing, even when they've thrown away what they had. Or, his eyes narrowed, because someone is paying him to cause problems. Who? That's what Viriato is discovering. He moved to where I sat, kneeling again so we were eye level. "Serena, I need you to trust me. Whatever happens in the next few days, whatever you hear, know that I am handling it. You and our daughter are safe here. No one can reach you. You're frightening me." "Good." His hand cupped my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone. "Fear will keep you cautious. Caution will keep you safe." That night, I woke to voices in the hallway, Nikolai's controlled baritone and another man's urgent tones. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. "Found evidence of communication with the Kozlov organization," the unfamiliar voice said. "Castro's been feeding them information, trying to locate the girl. They're offering him money to—" "Enough." Nikolai's voice cut through the report like a blade. "Double the security here. I want eyes on every approach. If anyone gets within 100 yards of this property without authorization, I want to know immediately. And Castro? Leave him to me." The footsteps retreated, but I heard Nikolai remain in the hallway, his presence a tangible weight even through the door. After a moment he spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. "I know you're awake, Solnishko. I can hear your breathing change." I opened the door to find him leaning against the opposite wall, still in the clothes he'd worn to dinner, though his tie was loosened and the top buttons of his shirt undone. In the dim hallway lighting, he looked younger, more vulnerable, the weight he carried visible in the tension of his shoulders. "The Kozlov organization," I said. "Should I know that name?" "No, and if I have my way, you never will." He pushed off the wall, moving closer. "They're rivals, dangerous people who would use you to get to me if they could. But they can't, Serena. Because you're here, and this house is a fortress, and I will burn this city to ash before I let anyone harm you." The intensity in his voice made me shiver, but not entirely from fear. There was something almost intoxicating about being claimed so completely, about being the focus of such absolute determination. It should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself taking a step closer. "Why me?" The question emerged raw, vulnerable. You could have any woman. Why fixate on someone you spent one night with? His laugh was low, almost pained. "You think I chose this? Chose to be consumed by a woman who left me with nothing but a sketch and questions I couldn't answer?" He closed the distance between us, his hands framing my face with devastating gentleness. "I fought it, Serena. For weeks after you left, I told myself you were just another night, another temporary comfort. But then I would find your drawing, or catch your scent on my pillow, or close my eyes and see the way you looked at me. Really looked at me. Like I was a man instead of a monster." His forehead touched mine, his breath warm against my lips. "And when I discovered you were pregnant, When Viriato finally tracked you down and I saw the proof that you carried my child. His voice broke slightly. It wasn't a choice anymore, Solnishko. It was inevitability. I'm still afraid, I whispered. I know. But fear and trust are not mutually exclusive. You can be afraid of my world while trusting that I will keep you safe within it. Before I could respond, before I could close the last inch between us or retreat to safety, my phone buzzed from inside my room. We both froze. At nearly 2 a.m, no one should be calling except Mira, I said, rushing to answer. My best friend's voice came through panicked and breathless. Serena, oh God, I'm so sorry. Someone broke into my apartment. They were looking for you. They had a photo. They kept asking where you were, if you'd told me anything. Are you hurt? I demanded, Nikolai already moving, his phone to his ear, rapid Russian filling the room. No. I locked myself in the bathroom and called 911. They left when they heard the sirens. But Serena, they knew about the baby. They said, her voice dropped to a whisper. They said they had buyers who would pay well for the child of Nikolai Machado. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Nikolai caught it, spoke briefly to Mira in a tone that managed to be both commanding and reassuring, then ended the call. When he looked at me, his eyes held a fury that should have terrified me. This ends now, he said quietly. Tomorrow, I'm dealing with Castro and the Kozlovs both. But tonight, you're moving to the master suite. My room, where I can protect you personally. Nikolai, this is not negotiable, Serena. He pulled me against him, his hand cradling the back of my head, my swollen belly pressed between us. They know about our daughter. They're willing to hurt people close to you to get to me. The only place you're truly safe is where I can see you, touch you, know with absolute certainty that you're protected. I should have argued, should have insisted on maintaining boundaries, on protecting what remained of my independence. But Mira's terrified voice echoed in my head, and the baby kicked hard against my ribs as if in agreement, and suddenly I was so tired of being strong alone. Okay, I whispered against his chest, breathing in cedar and dark spices and the unique scent that was purely him. Okay. He lifted me then, cradling me against his chest with a gentleness that belied his strength, carrying me down the hallway to a door I'd never entered. The master suite was dark and masculine, all deep colors and heavy furniture, but the bed looked impossibly soft, and when he laid me down on it, the mattress conformed to my aching back like it had been designed specifically for my comfort. Sleep, he commanded, pulling a blanket over me. I have calls to make, arrangements to finalize. By morning, Castro and the Kozlovs will understand the cost of threatening what's mine. He moved toward a desk in the corner, but I caught his hand. Will you hurt Julian? Nikolai's smile was cold, predatory, utterly without mercy. Not physically, that would be too kind. By the time I'm finished, he'll wish I had simply killed him. The promise should have horrified me. Instead, I found myself thinking of Julian's cruel laughter, his public humiliation, his willingness to endanger me and my child for money or revenge or whatever motivated his current choices. Good, I said, and meant it. Something flickered in Nikolai's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or recognition. He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. Sleep, Solnishko. When you wake, you'll be safer than you've ever been. I drifted off to the sound of his voice on the phone, speaking in Russian that rose and fell like a dangerous symphony, making plans I didn't understand for outcomes I could only imagine. And for the first time in 7 months, I slept without dreaming of running. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight, and the realization that I'd slept more deeply than I had in months. Nikolai's scent surrounding me from the pillows, his presence in the room, or just beyond it, a strange comfort I was still learning to accept. I woke to find him seated in an armchair near the windows, laptop balanced on his knees, already dressed in another impeccable suit, though he'd foregone the tie. His eyes found mine immediately, as if he'd been monitoring my breathing even while working. "How did you sleep?" His voice carried the rasp of someone who hadn't rested at all, and I noticed the coffee cup on the table beside him, the shadows beneath his eyes that suggested he'd been awake through the night. "Better than I have in weeks." I struggled to sit up, my belly making the maneuver awkward. "Did you sleep at all?" "I don't sleep well." He set the laptop aside, moving to help me, his hands steady on my arms as I finally achieved a semi-upright position. I never have. Too many years of needing to stay vigilant, I suppose. The admission felt significant. A small crack in his armor. I studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes, the tightness of his jaw that suggested whatever calls he'd made through the night had not gone easily. What happened? With Julian and the Kozlovs? Nikolai's expression hardened. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with. They've been dealt with." "Nikolai." He sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of my jaw. "Fine. Julian Castro has been served with multiple lawsuits. Fraud, embezzlement, breach of contract. My legal team spent the night combing through his business dealings and found enough irregularities to keep him occupied for years. His assets have been frozen, his reputation destroyed. By afternoon, every newspaper in the city will be running stories about his criminal activities. And the Kozlovs?" His smile was cold, shark-like. "Let's just say they received a very clear message about the consequences of threatening my family. They won't be a problem again." I should have asked what that message entailed, what consequences he'd delivered in the dark hours between midnight and dawn. But some part of me, the part that had felt our daughter kick against my ribs while Julian mocked me, the part that had heard Mira's terrified voice on the phone, didn't want to know. Didn't want to examine too closely the relief I felt, knowing that Nikolai had handled it, had protected us with the same ruthless efficiency that made him dangerous. "Thank you," I said instead, the words inadequate for the complexity of what I felt. "You don't thank me for protecting what's mine. Solnishko." He cupped my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. "You simply accept that I will always do so, no matter the cost." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting to something almost pleased. "Your friend Mira is here. I had Viriato collect her this morning and ensure her apartment was secured. I thought you might want to see her, confirm she's safe." Emotion clogged my throat. "You brought her here? She was threatened because of her connection to you. That makes her my responsibility to protect." He stood, offering his hand. "Come. She's waiting in the breakfast room." Mira looked smaller than I remembered, curled in a chair by the windows with a cup of coffee clutched between her palms. When she saw me, she launched herself forward, wrapping me in a fierce hug that had to navigate around my belly. "Thank God," she whispered against my shoulder. "When those men broke in, when they started asking questions, Serena, I was so scared." "I know. I'm sorry. I never meant for you to be dragged into this." I pulled back, studying her face for signs of harm. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "No. Scared me half to death, but physically I'm fine." Her eyes moved past me to where Nikolai stood in the doorway, and I saw her expression shift. Fear, certainly, but also a grudging respect. Nikolai sent a doctor to check me over anyway, and apparently I'm staying here until it's safe to return home. Not that I'm complaining about the accommodations. This place is insane." "Mira, it's okay." She squeezed my hand. "I mean, it's terrifying and completely surreal, but you look better than I've seen you in months. Less exhausted, less afraid. So maybe this crazy situation is what you need." We spent the morning together while Nikolai disappeared into his study, Mira filling me in on the outside world I'd been isolated from for nearly a week. Apparently, Julian's downfall was spectacular and public. News vans had camped outside his office building. His fiancée had broken off their engagement via a scathing social media post, and his business partners were scrambling to distance themselves. "It's brutal," Mira said, though her tone suggested she found it entirely deserved. "But effective. No one's asking about you anymore. They're too busy watching Julian's empire crumble." "Nikolai's work," I acknowledged, the truth settling strangely in my chest. "He protects what's his." Mira's eyes found mine, serious and searching. "Serena, I know this is fast and complicated and probably terrifying, but that man, he looks at you like you're the only thing in the world that matters. I saw it when he sent his men to get me. He was calm, controlled, but there was this intensity when he mentioned your name. Like saying it out loud caused him physical pain. We barely know each other. You're carrying his child. That seems like a significant connection." She paused. "Do you love him?" The question caught me off guard. Did I? I barely knew Nikolai beyond the night we'd shared and the week we'd spent navigating this impossible situation. But I remembered his tenderness that night at the hotel, the way he'd kissed away my tears. I remembered the vulnerability in his voice when he'd told me about his father, the absolute certainty when he'd promised to protect our daughter. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think I could. That's what terrifies me." Before Mira could respond, Viriato appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Frere, Mr. Machado requests your presence in his study when convenient." Convenient was an interesting word choice, suggesting this was a request rather than a command. I exchanged a glance with Mira, who made shooing motions. "Go. I'll be fine here with more coffee and this view. We can talk later." Nikolai's study was all dark wood and leather, shelves lined with books in Russian and English, a massive desk positioned to face the door so he could see anyone who entered. He stood when I appeared, moving around the desk with that predatory grace I was beginning to recognize as simply how he moved through the world. "Sit, please." He gestured to a comfortable chair near the fireplace, waiting until I'd settled before taking the seat across from me. "I wanted to show you something." He handed me a tablet displaying a legal document dense with text I struggled to parse. "What is this?" "A trust fund in our daughter's name. Irrevocable, substantial enough to ensure she never wants for anything regardless of what happens to me or my businesses." His eyes held mine. "I also had my lawyers draw up documents establishing your legal rights as her mother, ensuring that no one, including me, can make decisions about her welfare without your consent." I stared at him, struggling to process what he was offering. "You're giving me legal power over our daughter, even against you? You're her mother. That should mean something beyond biology." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Serena, I know you're afraid I'll try to control you, to use our daughter as leverage to keep you compliant. These documents prevent that. If you choose to leave, you can. You'll have resources, protection, and full custody unless you choose to share it." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Because I want you to stay by choice, not coercion. Because my father died trying to protect my mother, and she never forgave herself for not being able to save him. I won't build our life on the foundation of you feeling trapped." Tears blurred my vision as I stared at this complicated, dangerous man, who just handed me the power to destroy him emotionally, while taking away any leverage he might have used to keep me. "What if I do leave? What if I take our daughter and disappear?" Pain flickered across his face, quickly masked. "Then I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you're both safe from a distance. I will hate it. I will probably make your life difficult with my need to protect you. But I won't force you to stay, Solnishko. That's not love. That's possession." The word hung between us, unspoken until now. Love. Was that what this was? This consuming need, this fierce protectiveness, this certainty that had driven him to search for me, to claim me, to destroy anyone who threatened me? Tell me about that night, I said impulsively. At the hotel. What were you doing there? He settled back in his chair, his eyes distant with memory. Drowning my sorrows, ironically. I'd just finalized a deal that should have felt like a victory, but instead left me hollow. I was drinking alone at the bar, contemplating the emptiness of winning when there's no one to share it with, when I saw you. I was a mess that night. You were beautiful. And sad. And when you caught me looking, you smiled. This broken, fragile thing that made me want to destroy whoever had hurt you. His voice softened. I wasn't supposed to approach you. I should have finished my drink and left. But then you were next to me, ordering vodka with tears on your cheeks, and I couldn't walk away. I remembered it differently. Him as the gravitational force, me as the debris pulled into his orbit. But maybe we'd both been drowning that night, reaching for each other in the dark. Julian had just told me he'd been cheating for 6 months with his secretary. I confessed. Called off our engagement at a restaurant full of people. Said I was too boring, too predictable, that he needed someone with more. Fire. I laughed bitterly. Funny how fire looks when you're not the one being burned. I'm glad he left you. Nikolai's voice was fierce. Because it brought you to me. Because our daughter exists. Because I got to know what it feels like to have someone see me as a man instead of a monster. You are a man, I said, understanding dawning. A complicated, dangerous, protective man. But a man nonetheless. He stood, crossing to kneel before my chair the way he had that first night in my room, his hands covering mine where they rested on my belly. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. My heart hammered against my ribs. Okay. Do you feel safe here? Not just physically protected, but emotionally safe? Can you imagine building a life in this house, raising our daughter in this world? I looked around the study, at the books and the fireplace, and the windows overlooking gardens where I could imagine a little girl playing. I thought about Mira safe in the breakfast room, about Julian's empire crumbling because he'd threatened me, about Nikolai's exhausted eyes from spending the night protecting what he'd claimed as his. I think so, I said carefully. But I need you to understand that I'm still figuring this out. Still learning to trust that this is real and not just some temporary arrangement that will fall apart when the novelty wears off. I'm not a man who does temporary, Serena. His hands tightened on mine. When I commit to something, I see it through. And I've committed to you and our daughter with everything I am. The baby chose that moment to kick, hard enough that Nikolai felt it through my belly. His eyes widened, his expression transforming into something almost childlike in its wonder. She's strong, he murmured. She's your daughter. Of course she's strong. He looked up at me then, and for the first time I saw him completely unguarded, vulnerable, hopeful, terrified in a way that had nothing to do with business rivals or criminal organizations. This was the fear of a man who'd found something precious and couldn't bear to lose it. Marry me, he said, the words emerging raw and unplanned. I froze. What? Not now. Not until after she's born. Not until you're sure. But marry me, Serena. Let me give you my name, my protection, my life. Let me wake up every morning knowing you're mine by choice, not just by circumstance. Nikolai, I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But I also know that I've never felt this certain about anything in my life. You make me want to be better than what my world demands. You make me imagine a future beyond just surviving. His voice dropped to a whisper. Please, at least tell me you'll think about it. I should have said no. Should have cited all the logical reasons why marrying a man I'd known for a week. A dangerous man, a complicated man, a man whose world I didn't understand, was insane. But looking into his storm-gray eyes, feeling our daughter move between us, remembering the absolute certainty with which he'd protected me, I found myself nodding. "I'll think about it," I whispered. The smile that broke across his face was radiant, transforming him from austere predator to something almost beautiful. He pressed his forehead to my belly, his hands cradling the curve with reverent gentleness. "That's all I ask, Solnishko. Just think about it." 3 weeks passed in a strange domesticity I was still learning to navigate. Dr. Aldina Mura became a regular presence, visiting twice weekly to monitor my progress as I entered the final weeks of pregnancy. She was brisk and efficient, but kind, her dark eyes missing nothing as she checked my blood pressure and measured my belly, offering reassurance when the baby's movements became less frequent or more intense. "Everything is progressing normally," she told me during one visit, her stethoscope cold against my abdomen as she listened to the rapid flutter of my daughter's heartbeat. "But we're getting close. I'd estimate 2 more weeks, maybe 3. Make sure you're ready." Ready. The word felt enormous. Was I ready to become a mother? Ready to bring a life into Nikolai's complicated world? Ready to accept the reality that whatever happened next would bind me to him forever, not through legal documents or marriage proposals, but through the tiny human we'd created together? Nikolai, for his part, threw himself into preparation with the same intensity he brought to everything else. The nursery that had been started weeks ago was completed. A beautiful space in soft sage and cream, with hand-painted murals of forests and stars that took my breath away. He'd hired the artist based on my portfolio, choosing someone whose style complemented mine. And the result was magical. "She should grow up with beauty," he'd said when I'd protested the expense. "With art and light, and things that remind her the world can be gentle." We fell into routines. Mornings. I'd wake to find him already dressed but lingering over coffee, waiting to see me before he left for whatever business demanded his attention. Evenings, he'd return by 6, joining me for dinner, and then retiring to the library where we'd spend hours talking about his childhood in Russia, about my scattered family, about books and art and the future neither of us could quite articulate yet. Mira had returned to her apartment after a week, though Nikolai had insisted on upgrading her security and having Viriato check on her regularly. She video-called daily, marveling at how my life had transformed, offering advice on motherhood from her extensive experience with her 3 younger siblings. "You're glowing," she'd observed during one call. "Like actually glowing. Pregnancy hormones or something else?" "Or something else," I'd admitted, not quite ready to examine what that something else might be. The something else had a name. Nikolai. I was falling for him, slowly and inevitably, like a tide pulled by the moon. It wasn't the dramatic passion of romance novels, but something quieter, more foundational, built on late-night conversations and the way he'd learned to make my favorite tea, on his gentle hands on my belly, and the Russian lullabies he'd sing to our daughter when he thought I was sleeping. But we'd maintained careful boundaries. He slept in the master suite. I remained in the guest room despite his initial insistence. I moved to his room that first panicked night. We touched often, his hand at my back, mine on his arm, the casual intimacy of 2 people growing comfortable with each other. But we hadn't crossed the line back into the passion that had created our daughter. Until the night, everything changed. I'd woken at 2 in the morning with contractions that weren't quite labor, but weren't Braxton Hicks either. The baby pressing low and insistent against my pelvis. I'd gotten up to pace, trying to ease the discomfort, when a sudden sharp pain made me cry out, grabbing for the wall to steady myself. Nikolai appeared in my doorway within seconds, his hair mussed from sleep, wearing only pajama bottoms that revealed the corded muscle of his torso. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. Just pain." Maybe false labor? But even as I said it, another contraction gripped me, stronger than before, and I felt warmth trickling down my thighs. My water had broken. Bože moi. Nikolai was suddenly all action, one arm supporting me while he reached for his phone with the other. Dr. Mora, we need you now. Her water just broke. Yes, I'm certain. He listened for a moment, his arm tightening around me. 20 minutes. We'll be ready. He helped me back to bed, moving with surprising gentleness for someone so large, his hands steady as he helped me out of my wet nightgown and into a robe. It's too early, I managed between contractions. She's not due for 2 more weeks. Babies come when they're ready. His voice was calm, controlled, but I saw the fear flickering in his eyes. The same fear I felt, magnified by his inability to control this, to protect me from the pain and danger of bringing life into the world. Dr. Mora will be here soon. Everything is going to be fine. The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity. Viriato appeared with my hospital bag, which Nikolai had apparently packed weeks ago without telling me. Dr. Mora arrived with a midwife and enough medical equipment to set up a full birthing suite in the master bedroom. Hospital? I managed to ask between increasingly intense contractions. Too risky, Dr. Mora said briskly, already scrubbing her hands. Too many variables we can't control. Here, we have everything we need and complete security. You're in good hands, Serena. The labor was long and brutal, waves of pain that crested higher and higher until I lost track of time, of everything except Nikolai's hand in mine and his voice in my ear, alternating between English and Russian, telling me I was strong, I was brave, I could do this. I can't, I sobbed at one point, exhausted beyond anything I'd ever experienced. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. He pressed his lips to my forehead, his other hand stroking my sweat-dampened hair. You're the strongest person I know, Solnishko. Just a little longer. Promise me. I grabbed his shirt, pulling him close. If something happens, if you have to choose, save her. Promise me. His face went white. Don't say that. Don't even think it. Promise me, Nikolai. I promise I'll save you both, he said fiercely. I didn't survive everything I've survived to lose either of you now. Do you understand me? You're both coming through this. Dr. Mora's voice cut through our exchange. Serena, I need you to push. Now. The next 30 minutes were the hardest of my life. Push and breathe and push again. Nikolai's hand crushed in mine, his voice constant in my ear. And then, a cry. Sharp and indignant and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, Dr. Mora announced, though we'd known for months. A beautiful, healthy girl. They placed her on my chest, this tiny miracle with dark hair and eyes that struggled to focus, her small fists waving in protest at the sudden cold brightness of the world. She was perfect. Absolutely. Impossibly perfect. Hello, my love, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I'm your mama. Nikolai's hand shook as he touched her tiny head, his expression a mixture of awe and terror and love so fierce it took my breath away. She's perfect, he breathed. You're perfect, both of you. Dr. Mora finished her work, declaring us both healthy despite the early arrival. The midwife helped clean me up and get the baby. Our daughter, who still needed a name, latched for her first feeding. Nikolai never left my side, his eyes tracking our daughter's every movement, like she might disappear if he looked away. When we were finally alone, the first rays of dawn painting the room gold, I looked up at him from where I reclined against the pillows, our daughter asleep against my chest. We need to name her, I said softly. I was thinking Nadezhda, he offered. It means hope in Russian. My mother's name. Nadezhda, I repeated, testing the weight of it. It's beautiful. But maybe something she can use in both worlds? Nadia? His smile was brilliant. Nadia Hope Machado. Perfect. Freire. I corrected automatically. Nadia Hope Freire. Something shifted in his expression. Serena. Unless, I interrupted, the decision crystallizing as I spoke, she could be Nadia Hope Machado Freire. Both of us. Both our names. Both our worlds. He stared at me, understanding dawning. Are you saying, ask me again, I whispered. Ask me what you asked me 3 weeks ago. Nikolai slid off the bed, kneeling beside it so he was eye level with me and our daughter. His hand shook as he took mine, his storm gray eyes bright with unshed tears. Serena Freire, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? Will you trust me with your heart the way I'm trusting you with mine? Yes, I said, the word simple and certain. Yes to all of it. He kissed me then, gentle and reverent, tasting of salt from both our tears. When he pulled back, his smile was radiant. When? He asked. After I can walk without waddling, I laughed. After Nadia's old enough to be flower girl at her parents' wedding. After we've had time to really know each other without crisis forcing our hands. I squeezed his fingers. But soon, because I love you, Nikolai Machado. I think I've loved you since that night in the hotel, even though I was too afraid to admit it. I know I've loved you since then, he confessed. Since you looked at me like I was worth drawing instead of fearing. Since you trusted me with your pain. Since you gave me this, he gestured to Nadia, the greatest gift I could ever receive. We stayed like that as dawn broke fully, the three of us in that bubble of new life and new love, the complications of his world temporarily held at bay by the simple miracle of our daughter's first breaths. Nadia was 2 months old when the wedding invitations went out, elegant cream cardstock with our names embossed in gold, announcing our intention to marry on Valentine's Day in the mansion's gardens. Mira had laughed when I'd shown her the date. Could you be more cliched? She'd teased. But her eyes were warm as she helped me address envelopes to the small list of guests we'd agreed on. Mostly Nikolai's business associates, and the few family members I still spoke to. It's romantic, I'd defended, though secretly I agreed it was a bit much. But Nikolai had suggested it. His eyes soft when he'd said he wanted to marry me on a day dedicated to love, and I'd found myself unable to resist. The past 2 months had been a revelation. Motherhood was harder than I'd imagined. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the way Nadia's every cry sent my heart racing with panic that something was wrong. But it was also more beautiful. Those moments when she'd smile at me, when her tiny hand would curl around my finger, when Nikolai would sing her those Russian lullabies in the middle of the night, his deep voice soothing her back to sleep. We'd fallen into new routines. Nikolai had reduced his hours, working more from home, his office converted into a space where he could conduct business while remaining close to us. I'd started illustrating again, setting up an easel in the nursery, creating new stories inspired by my daughter, by this life we were building. And we'd grown closer, the careful boundaries we'd maintained dissolving naturally as we navigated parenthood together. He'd moved a second bed into the master suite for me, claiming that nursing in the middle of the night would be easier if I didn't have to walk down the hall. I'd agreed, knowing it was an excuse, but finding I didn't mind. There was comfort in waking to find him nearby, in the whispered conversations we'd have while Nadia nursed, in the intimacy of sharing the chaos of new parenthood. We hadn't resumed the physical relationship that had created Nadia. Dr. Moura had cleared me at my 6-week checkup, but we'd both seemed content to take things slowly, to build our relationship on something more solid than just passion. But the tension was there, simmering beneath every touch, every lingering glance. Every night we fell asleep in separate beds but woke tangled together. It was Nadia who inadvertently changed things, waking at 3 a.m. with a cry that suggested hunger mixed with general displeasure at the world. I'd struggled out of bed, exhausted from a day of dealing with wedding preparations while she'd decided napping was for other babies, and lifted her from her bassinet. "I know, sweet girl. Mama's here." I settled into the rocking chair, but she fought the latch, arching her back and wailing with the particular fury only an overtired infant could muster. "Let me try." Nikolai appeared beside me, his hair disheveled, shirtless in just his pajama bottoms. He lifted Nadia gently, cradling her against his bare chest and beginning a slow walk around the room, humming one of his Russian lullabies. She quieted almost immediately, her small body relaxing against his skin, her eyes drifting closed. I watched them together, this powerful, dangerous man gentled completely by our daughter, and felt something shift inside me. Love mixed with desire, tenderness with need, the full force of what I'd been holding back crashing over me like a wave. "Nikolai," I whispered. He looked up, Nadia now fully asleep against him, and whatever he saw in my face made his eyes darken. "Serena, make love to me," I said, the words emerging certain and clear. "Not because we're getting married, not because of Nadia, but because I want you, and I love you, and I'm tired of sleeping in separate beds." He crossed to Nadia's bassinet, laying her down with infinite care, covering her with the soft blanket my grandmother had crocheted years ago. Then he turned to me, and the hunger in his eyes stole my breath. "Are you certain?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. "Because if we do this, Solnishko, there's no going back. You'll be mine completely." "I'm already yours," I said, rising from the rocking chair and closing the distance between us. "I have been since that night at the hotel. I was just too afraid to admit it." He kissed me then, deep and consuming, his hands framing my face like I was something precious and fragile and infinitely worth protecting. We moved to his bed, our bed, and he took his time, relearning my body with a reverence that made me tremble, showing me with touch and whispered words in Russian exactly how much he'd missed this, missed me, missed the connection we'd built that one night and were now reclaiming. Afterward, we lay tangled together, my head on his chest, his hand tracing lazy patterns on my back. Nadia slept peacefully in her bassinet, the three of us in this bubble of contentment I'd never imagined I'd find. "Tell me something," I murmured, my fingers tracing the scar I'd discovered on his ribs. "Something you've never told anyone else." He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I was engaged once before, when I was 25. Her name was Yelena. She was from a good family, appropriate in every way." Jealousy spiked through me, sharp and unexpected. "What happened?" "She discovered what I really did, the truth beneath the legitimate businesses, the violence I was willing to employ to protect what was mine. She looked at me with such horror, such disgust, that I ended it that night. I couldn't bear to see that expression every morning for the rest of my life." "And with me?" I asked, needing to understand. "When I found out who you were, did you think I'd look at you that way?" "I knew you already had," he said, his hand stilling on my back. "That night you left. You'd learned my real name somehow, discovered what I was, and you ran. I spent weeks convinced you'd looked at me with that same disgust." "It wasn't disgust," I confessed. "It was fear. Fear that you were too important, too powerful, too everything for someone like me. Fear that I was just another knight to you and I'd already started falling in love." His arms tightened around me. "Never just another knight. Never just anything. Serena, you were always everything." We drifted into sleep like that, wrapped around each other, and woke to Nadia's hungry cries as sunlight painted the room gold. The morning felt different, easier, lighter, as if some final barrier had crumbled and left us free to simply be together, The weeks leading to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Mira served as maid of honor, fussing over my dress, a simple ivory gown with lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that accommodated my post-pregnancy body without trying to hide it. Nikolai's best man was Viriato, the stoic security chief who'd proven surprisingly sentimental about the whole affair. "He's been different since you," Viriato confided one afternoon when I'd brought him coffee while he supervised the garden setup. "Lighter, like he remembers how to be happy instead of just surviving. He makes me happy too," I'd said, watching Nikolai through the window as he held Nadia, showing her the roses being arranged for the ceremony. But 2 days before the wedding, the fragile peace we'd built shattered. I'd been napping with Nadia when Nikolai burst into the room, his face tight with controlled fury. "We need to leave. Now." "What? Why?" I struggled to sit up, Nadia waking with a startled cry. "Julian Castro escaped police custody this morning. He's been making threats, claims he has information that could destroy me. My sources say he's hired people to come after you and Nadia." His hands shook as he helped me stand. "Viriato is preparing the safe house. We leave in 10 minutes. Terror seized me. I thought you'd handled him. The lawsuits, the exposed fraud, weren't enough apparently." Nikolai's voice was harsh with self-recrimination. "I should have ensured he was completely neutralized. I was too focused on legal destruction when I should have considered he'd be desperate enough to come after you directly." The safe house was a fortress disguised as a cabin 2 hours north, surrounded by forest, and accessible only by a single guarded road. We spent 3 days there while Nikolai's people searched for Julian. 3 days of mounting tension as wedding preparations were put on hold, and our future hung in the balance. On the 3rd night, Viriato appeared with news. We found him. He was planning to attack the mansion during the wedding, knowing security would be focused on the guests. His expression was grim. But he had help. The Kozlovs again. They'd been supplying him with information, resources. "Where is he now?" Nikolai's voice was deadly calm. "Contained. Waiting for your decision." Nikolai looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes. What did I want? What level of justice was I comfortable with? "I want him to face consequences," I said slowly. "Real consequences. But I don't want you to become the monster he claims you are. I don't want Nadia to grow up knowing her father killed a man for revenge." Something eased in Nikolai's expression. "Then we do this properly. Legal consequences. I have enough evidence of his conspiracy with the Kozlovs to put him away for years. He'll face trial, imprisonment, complete ruin, but he'll live." "And the Kozlovs?" His smile was cold. "We'll understand very clearly that there are consequences for threatening my family that have nothing to do with killing, but everything to do with destroying their operations completely. By the time I'm finished, they'll wish I'd simply killed them." True to his word, Nikolai orchestrated Julian's downfall with surgical precision. By the end of the week, Julian was in federal custody facing charges of conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and working with a criminal organization. The evidence was overwhelming. Recordings, financial transfers, detailed plans to abduct me and Nadia during the wedding chaos. The news coverage was brutal. Every channel ran stories about Julian Castro's fall from respected businessman to desperate criminal. His family disowned him. His former fiancée gave tearful interviews about the man she'd never truly known. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction or pity, or even relief. Just a quiet certainty that this chapter was finally, irrevocably closed. On Valentine's Day, with the gardens transformed into a winter wonderland of white roses and fairy lights, I married Nikolai Machado in front of 40 guests, with Mira crying happy tears, and Viriato looking suspiciously emotional, and Nadia sleeping peacefully in her grandmother's arms, Nikolai's mother, who'd flown in from Russia and taken one look at me before pulling me into a fierce hug and declaring in broken English that I'd made her son happier than she'd ever seen him. As I walked down the aisle on my own, no one to give me away, because I was choosing this myself, claiming this life, and this man, and this future. I caught Nikolai's eyes and saw everything he felt reflected back at me. Love, yes, but also relief, gratitude, wonder that we'd both survived everything that had tried to destroy us and found each other anyway. "You're beautiful," he whispered when I reached him, his hands taking mine, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You're mine," I whispered back, and watched joy transform his face. The ceremony was simple, our vows traditional. But when the officiant pronounced us married and Nikolai kissed me, there was nothing simple about it. Only the promise of everything we'd build together, everything we'd already survived, everything we'd protect with the fierce love that had brought us through darkness into light. 5 years later, I stood in the same gardens where we'd married, watching Nadia chase butterflies through the rose bushes, her dark hair streaming behind her, her laughter the most beautiful sound in the world. She wore a purple dress she'd insisted on, like the princesses in Mama's books, and had dirt on her knees from investigating interesting rocks, because our daughter had inherited both my artistic eye and Nikolai's determination to understand how everything worked. "She's going to need a bath before dinner," Mira observed from her seat beside me, her own daughter, 1-year-old Carmo, sleeping against her shoulder. "And possibly a complete wardrobe change." "Probably," I agreed, smiling. "But she's happy. That's what matters." My life had transformed so completely in those 5 years that sometimes I had to pause and marvel at it. My illustrations had been published in a series of children's books that had become bestsellers, my whimsical style finding an audience hungry for stories about brave little girls and the dragons who became their friends. Nikolai had encouraged every step, converting one of the mansion's rooms into a proper studio, hiring a publicist to manage my growing fame while maintaining our privacy. He'd also gradually legitimized more of his operations, using his power and resources to build legal empires that didn't require the violence of his past. He still had enemies. Men like him always did. But he'd learned to navigate his world with strategy rather than force, becoming someone the city's elite courted rather than feared. Though they still feared him, just enough to respect boundaries. Nadia knew her father was important, that he had responsibilities beyond our family, but she also knew him as the man who read her stories at bedtime, who taught her Russian nursery rhymes, who let her paint his nails when she wanted to practice being a beauty expert. She was loved, protected, cherished, everything Nikolai and I had promised each other that first terrifying night. And Julian? He'd been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for his conspiracy charges, his appeals exhausted, his name a cautionary tale about what happened when desperation drove people to ally with dangerous forces. I'd seen one article about him recently, noting how different he looked. Older, diminished, the arrogance that had defined him eroded by years of consequences. I'd felt nothing. He was a closed chapter, relevant only as the man whose cruelty had pushed me toward the hotel bar where I'd met Nikolai. "Mrs. Machado Freire?" Viriato appeared at my elbow, still serving as head of security, but now with a wife and twin boys of his own. "There's someone at the gate asking for you. Says she's a journalist from Metropolitan Life magazine." I exchanged a glance with Mira. I'd been avoiding most press, keeping my public persona focused on my work rather than my personal life. But Metropolitan Life was prestigious, known for substantive profiles rather than gossip. "What does she want?" "An interview about your newest book series and your philanthropic work." The philanthropic work was Nikolai's idea, a foundation we'd started together supporting arts education in underserved communities, combining my passion for creativity with his resources. It had grown beyond anything we'd imagined, now operating programs in 12 states. Let her in, I decided. But the interview happens in my studio. Nikolai and Nadia stay private. The journalist was younger than I expected, maybe 30. With sharp eyes and a recorder she asked permission to use. We settled in my studio, surrounded by my artwork, and she began with standard questions. my process, my inspiration, what I hoped readers took from my stories. Then she shifted. Your husband is Nikolai Machado. The Nikolai Machado. How do you reconcile his reputation with your work creating content for children? I'd expected this. Had practiced the answer. My husband is a complicated man who has built legitimate businesses that employ thousands of people. He's also the man who holds our daughter when she has nightmares, who teaches her to be kind and brave and thoughtful. I reconcile it by understanding that people are more than their reputations, more than the worst things they've ever done. And his past. The allegations of criminal activity. Allegations that were never proven in any court of law, I said calmly. My husband has enemies who would like to damage his reputation. But I know the man I married. I know the father raising our daughter, and I trust him completely. She made notes, then looked up. I have to ask, do you know what people say about you? That you used to be engaged to Julian Castro? That he publicly humiliated you at a charity gala? My spine straightened. I do know what people say. I was there, after all, when Julian decided to mock me in front of a ballroom full of people. How did it feel, having your ex-fiancé tell you that you used to be pretty? The memory should have stung. Instead, I smiled, sharp and certain. It felt like watching a small, cruel man reveal exactly who he was to everyone watching. And then watching my future husband, the man Julian thought was just another guest, claim me as his own and destroy Julian's entire world within days. So it felt like the beginning of my real life, I suppose. The life where I'm loved, valued, protected by someone who sees me as I actually am, instead of some lesser version of what he wanted. The journalist's eyes widened. That's quite a statement. It's the truth. Julian tried to make me feel small because he'd lost his power over me. He didn't know I was carrying Nikolai's child. Didn't know I'd already found something infinitely better than what he'd offered. And now? I gestured to the framed photo on my desk. Nikolai and Nadia and me at last year's Christmas, all of us laughing at something Nadia had said. Now Julian is in prison, and I'm building a life with a man who would burn the world to keep me safe. So who really won that exchange? Do you ever regret how public that humiliation was? Not even slightly, I said. Because it led me here. To my daughter, my husband, my work. Every terrible moment, every fear, every doubt. It was all necessary to get me to this life. I wouldn't change any of it. After the interview ended and the journalist left, I found Nikolai in the library. Nadia curled against his side as he read her one of my books in Russian, translating as he went. They looked up when I entered. Identical gray eyes. Nadia had inherited his eyes, my stubborn chin, tracking my movement across the room. How did it go? Nikolai asked, even as Nadia squirmed free and ran to hug my legs. Mama, Papa was reading the dragon story. Can we have a dragon, Mama? A small one? I lifted her into my arms, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the dirt she'd acquired exploring. Absolutely not. Dragons are expensive and they hog the bathroom. She giggled, that pure sound of childhood joy, before wiggling to be put down so she could return to her spot beside Nikolai. The interview was fine, I told him, settling on his other side. She asked about us, about Julian, about everything. I told her the truth, which is that I married the right man. That Julian's cruelty was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it pushed me toward you. That I'm grateful for everything, even the hard parts, because they gave me this life. Nikolai's arm came around me, pulling me close. Nadia wedged happily between us as he resumed reading. And in that moment, I understood what contentment truly meant. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love so certain, so foundational, that it could weather anything. 6 weeks later, Metropolitan Life published the article. The cover showed me in my studio, surrounded by my artwork, with the headline, Serena Machado Freire, From Humiliation to Triumph, the artist who chose love over fear. Inside, the journalist had captured not just our conversation, but the entire trajectory. Julian's public cruelty, my hidden pregnancy, Nikolai's dramatic claim, our unconventional courtship, the wedding that had dominated society pages. She'd interviewed others too. Mira, who spoke glowingly about our friendship. Viriato, who described Nikolai's transformation. Even Dr. Mura, who confirmed that I'd given birth to a healthy baby girl in the midst of chaos. But it was the final paragraph that went viral, shared across social media by thousands. When I asked Serena about Julian Castro's infamous words, "You used to be pretty," she laughed. "He was right," she told me. I used to be pretty. Insecure, diminished, trying to make myself smaller to fit someone else's expectations of who I should be. Now, I'm so much more. I'm a mother, a wife, an artist, a woman who knows her worth. Pretty feels like such a small, inadequate word for what I've become. And Julian? He'll spend the next decade in prison, thinking about the woman he mocked who became untouchable, while I'm here living the life he'll never understand. One built on real love instead of manipulation and fear. So yes, I used to be pretty. Now I'm magnificent. The article included photos, carefully selected ones that showed my artwork, my studio, a distant shot of me with Nadia in the gardens. But the one that everyone shared was the candid the photographer had caught without my realizing. Nikolai arriving home from work, sweeping me into his arms while Nadia laughed between us. All three of us captured in a moment of such obvious love and joy that it became iconic. Within days, my book sales tripled. Interview requests poured in. But more importantly, messages arrived from women who'd experienced similar humiliations, who'd been made to feel less than, who'd been told they used to be something and needed to hear that they could become so much more. Julian would have seen the article, I realized. Would have read my words from his prison cell. Would have understood too late that the woman he'd mocked had become legendary, while he'd become cautionary. And I hoped it hurt. I hoped he stayed up at night, replaying that moment in the ballroom when he'd thought he was powerful, and I was powerless. I hoped he understood, finally, that true power had nothing to do with public humiliation, and everything to do with building a life so magnificent that your critics became irrelevant. 5 years after Julian told me I used to be pretty, I stood in my gardens with my husband and daughter, surrounded by the life we'd built from ashes and determination, and I was beautiful. Not in the way Julian had meant, not in some shallow aesthetic sense, but in the way that mattered. Beautiful in my choices, beautiful in my courage, beautiful in the love I'd claimed despite every reason to run, beautiful in the family I'd created with a man the world called dangerous, but I knew as simply mine. And that, I thought as Nikolai kissed me while Nadia made disgusted 5-year-old sounds and the cameras captured it all for posterity, was the best revenge of all, not destroying my enemy, but becoming so genuinely happy that his opinion ceased to matter entirely. I used to be pretty. Now I was unstoppable. And that was infinitely better. The magazine interview had been published for 3 weeks when the first letter arrived. I found it on my desk in the studio, nestled between sketches for my newest book series, a collection about a girl who discovered she was braver than anyone believed. The envelope was plain cream paper, the handwriting careful and precise, addressed simply to Serena Machado Freire, care of Metropolitan Life magazine. Inside, a single page filled with neat cursive. Dear Mrs. Machado Freire, I read your interview last week and cried for an hour. Not sad tears, relief tears. 5 years ago, my husband told me I'd let myself go after our twins were born. He left me for a younger woman, took most of our savings, and made sure everyone in our small town knew he thought I was no longer worth loving. I believed him. I let his words define me for so long that I forgot I was more than his opinion. Your words, "I used to be pretty, now I'm magnificent," gave me permission to see myself differently. I went back to school. I'm finishing my nursing degree next month. My twins are proud of their mom. And last week, I saw my ex-husband at the grocery store. He tried to talk to me, to explain, to apologize. And I realized I didn't care anymore. His opinion had become irrelevant because I'd built a life so full that there was no room for his diminishment. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being brave enough to claim your worth publicly. You gave a voice to so many of us who needed to hear that we could become more than what we used to be. With gratitude, Rebecca M. I sat at my desk for a long time, tears streaming down my face. Rebecca's letter clutched in my hands. This was why I'd agreed to the interview despite my discomfort with publicity. This was why I'd shared the painful parts alongside the triumphant ones. By the end of the week, I'd received 43 more letters. By the end of the month, hundreds. Women who'd been told they weren't enough, who'd been diminished and dismissed and made to feel small. Women who'd found the courage to rebuild. Women who wanted to share their own transformations. "You've started something," Mira observed one afternoon, watching me sort through the latest batch of mail while Nadia practiced her letters at the art table, her tongue poking out in concentration as she carefully drew the letter N. A movement, maybe. "It's just letters," I protested, though my heart swelled with each story I read. "It's validation. It's community. It's women realizing they're not alone." Mira picked up one of the letters, scanning it quickly. "This one's from a woman in Oregon who left an abusive marriage after reading your interview. This one's from a teenager whose boyfriend told her she was getting fat. They're all looking for permission to value themselves." I looked down at the letter in my hands. From a woman in her 60s who'd been told by her own children that she was embarrassing for wanting to date again after her husband's death. She'd met someone wonderful, someone who made her feel beautiful and cherished, and my words had given her the courage to stop apologizing for her happiness. "Maybe we could do something with these," I said slowly, an idea forming. "Not publish them without permission, but create a space for these stories. A project that shows women they're not alone in being told they're not enough, and that there's power in redefining yourself on your own terms." Mira's eyes lit up. "Like a book? A collection of stories? Or a foundation? Something that provides resources, support, scholarships for women rebuilding their lives after being diminished by people who should have loved them better." I thought of Nikolai's existing charitable foundation, the work we'd already started together. We could expand what we're already doing, make it specifically about empowering women who've been told they're not enough. That evening, I brought the idea to Nikolai over dinner, a casual affair in the breakfast nook we'd claimed as our family space, with Nadia's artwork covering the walls, and her latest creation, a painting of what she insisted was a dragon but looked more like a purple blob, drying on the counter. "A foundation for women who've been diminished," he repeated, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in the gesture I'd learned meant he was thinking strategically. "Focused on what specifically? Education, job training, legal support?" "All of it," I said, warming to the idea as I articulated it. "Scholarships for women returning to school, job training and placement services, legal assistance for those escaping difficult situations, counseling and support groups, child care assistance. Whatever barriers exist that keep women trapped in situations where they're told they're not enough, we help remove those barriers." Nikolai was quiet for a moment, his storm gray eyes studying me with an intensity that still made my breath catch after 5 years of marriage. Then he smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "I'll have Mauro draw up the paperwork. We'll seed it with initial funding from our existing foundation. Establish a board of directors, create a proper infrastructure. He reached across the table, taking my hand. And we'll name it after you, the Serena Initiative. Absolutely not, I protested immediately. This isn't about me. It's about all the women who saw themselves in your story, he interrupted gently, who needed permission to value themselves that you provided. Your name carries weight now, Solnishko. Use it for good. I wanted to argue, but Nadia chose that moment to announce that her dragon was finished, and could we please hang it on the refrigerator immediately, because it was her best work ever. The conversation shifted to 5-year-old artistic ambitions, and whether purple dragons were scarier than green ones. And by the time we'd settled Nadia in bed with her favorite story about the lonely dragon who made friends, I'd almost forgotten about the foundation discussion. But Nikolai hadn't. Over the next 3 months, he worked with his usual relentless efficiency to transform my vague idea into concrete reality. The Serena Initiative was established with an initial endowment that made my head spin, enough to fund operations for years, to help hundreds of women, to create real, lasting change. We assembled a board of directors that included Dr. Aldina Mura, who'd delivered Nadia and understood the vulnerability of women in crisis. Mira, whose fierce advocacy and organizational skills made her invaluable. And 3 other women, whose own stories of rebuilding after devastation gave them unique insight into what was needed. The initiative launched quietly at first. A website, some targeted outreach to domestic violence shelters and community organizations, scholarships offered through local colleges. But word spread quickly, amplified by the women who'd written to me, by journalists who'd followed up on the Metropolitan Life article, by the organic network of people who believed that women deserved better than to be diminished. 6 months after the launch, we'd helped 63 women. A year later, that number had grown to over 200. Women who'd returned to school, who'd left abusive situations, who'd started businesses or pursued dreams they'd been told were foolish or impossible. And the letters kept coming. Hundreds, then thousands, sharing stories of transformation and gratitude and hope. It was one of those letters that changed everything again. I was in my studio on a Tuesday afternoon, Nadia at a playdate with a friend from kindergarten, when I opened an envelope postmarked from a federal prison in Pennsylvania. My first instinct was to throw it away. We got occasional hate mail, people who thought the foundation was feminist nonsense, or who had their own axes to grind. But something made me read it. Dear Serena, you don't know me, but I know you. Or I thought I did. My name is Claire Reynolds, and 5 years ago I was engaged to Julian Castro. You might remember me. I was the woman in the red dress at the Hartwell Grand Ballroom, the one standing beside Julian when he humiliated you. I've thought about that night often during the past 5 years, about how I laughed when he mocked you, about how I stood there in my designer gown and expensive jewelry and felt superior because I was the one on his arm, not you. About how I saw you as competition defeated rather than as a woman being publicly degraded. I'm writing from a women's correctional facility where I'm serving 3 years for fraud and embezzlement, crimes I committed alongside Julian before his arrest. I was more than his fiancé. I was his accomplice, helping him steal from investors, falsify documents, destroy the lives of people who'd trusted him. I told myself I was in love, that his ambition was attractive, that the ends justified the means. But really, I was just another woman who'd been told she wasn't enough on her own, that her worth came from being chosen by a powerful man, that she should compromise her values to maintain that position. I read about your foundation in a magazine someone left in the common room. I read the Metropolitan Life interview 3 times. And I realized that you and I aren't so different. Both women who Julian tried to diminish, who he used for his own purposes. The difference is that you found someone who saw your worth and helped you see it yourself, while I attached myself to someone who encouraged my worst instincts. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I wanted you to know that your work matters. That even here, in this place, There are women who need to hear that they can become more than they were, that mistakes don't define us forever. I'm taking college courses through a prison program. I'm learning to code, to build websites. When I get out, I want to help other women avoid the mistakes I made. I want to be someone my younger self could have looked up to, instead of someone I'm ashamed to have been. Thank you for showing me what that could look like. Sincerely, Claire Reynolds. I read the letter 3 times, emotions churning through me. Anger at her complicity in my humiliation. Sympathy for the woman she'd become. Recognition of the courage it took to write this. Finally, I showed it to Nikolai that evening after Nadia was asleep. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set it down carefully and looked at me. What do you want to do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it. She helped Julian try to destroy you, tried to hurt us. But part of me sees yourself in her, he finished quietly. Sees a woman who made mistakes because she was looking for value in the wrong places. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. Is that naive? Stupid? She was complicit in everything Julian did. She was, and she's serving her sentence for those choices. Nikolai pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me. But you're not naive for seeing the possibility of redemption, Solnishko. You're compassionate. It's one of the things I love most about you. Your ability to see people as more than their worst moments. You think I should respond? I think you should follow your instincts. His hand stroked my hair gently. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But know this. She's not asking for anything from you. She's not claiming to be a victim. She's taking responsibility and trying to build something better. That matters. After another week of consideration, I wrote back. Not a long letter. Just a brief acknowledgement that I'd received hers. That I wished her well in her rehabilitation. That the Foundation's resources would be available to her upon release if she needed them. I didn't offer friendship or forgiveness, but I offered possibility. Her response came a month later, shorter than the first, but no less impactful. She'd been accepted into an advanced coding program. She'd started a support group in the prison for women working to rebuild their lives. She thanked me for not dismissing her, for seeing potential where she'd only seen shame. We corresponded occasionally after that. Careful, respectful letters that acknowledged our complicated history while focusing on her transformation. And when she was released 2 years later, the Foundation helped place her in a position at a tech company that hired formerly incarcerated individuals, giving her the chance to rebuild that she'd never thought she'd have. You're too forgiving, Mira said when I told her about Claire's job placement. That woman helped Julian try to destroy you. She did, I agreed. And she paid for it. But people aren't static, Mira. They're capable of growth, of change, of becoming better than they were. Isn't that what the Foundation is about? Giving women the chance to become more than their circumstances, more than their mistakes. When you put it that way, Mira sighed, I can't really argue. The Foundation continued to grow, its impact rippling outward in ways I'd never imagined. We helped women escape abusive situations. We funded education for single mothers. We provided job training and childcare assistance and legal support and counseling. We created a network of women supporting women, sharing resources and stories and strength. And through it all, Nikolai was my partner in every sense, providing funding certainly, but also strategy, connections, protection when the work brought us into contact with dangerous people. His reputation, once something I'd feared, became a tool we used to shield the women we helped from those who might harm them. You've made me better, he told me one night as we watched Nadia sleep, her 7-year-old face peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight. She was growing so fast, all long limbs and artistic passion, already showing signs of the woman she'd become. Given me purpose beyond just surviving. beyond just protecting what's mine. You've shown me how to build, instead of just defend. You were always capable of building, I said, taking his hand. You just needed a reason. His smile was soft, tender. You and Nadia are my reason. Everything I do, everything I've built, it's all for you. To create a world where our daughter never has to hear that she's not enough. Where she grows up knowing her worth is inherent, not dependent on anyone else's opinion. I thought about that as I watched Nadia grow, as the foundation expanded to serve thousands of women. As the years passed, and our family settled into the rhythm of a life I'd never imagined I'd have. The girl who'd been publicly humiliated, who'd fled into the night pregnant and afraid, who'd hidden in plain sight while carrying the child of a man she barely knew. She seemed like a different person now, someone I'd left behind. But she was still there, in the quiet moments. In the letters I read from women who saw themselves in my story. In the fierce determination to ensure no woman felt as small as I'd felt that night in the ballroom. On the 10th anniversary of that night, 10 years since Julian had told me I used to be pretty, 10 years since Nikolai had claimed me in front of everyone, 10 years since my life had irrevocably changed, we held a gala for the foundation. It was held deliberately and with a certain poetic justice at the Hartwell Grand Ballroom. I wore a gown of deep sapphire blue, custom designed to make me feel powerful and beautiful, and entirely myself. Nikolai stood beside me in a tuxedo that emphasized his still impressive build, his hair now liberally streaked with silver that only made him more distinguished. And between us, in a dress she'd designed herself with my help, because at 10 years old, Nadia had inherited my artistic eye and her father's determination, stood our daughter, proud and confident and absolutely radiant. The ballroom was filled with women we'd helped, donors who'd supported our work, board members and staff and allies who believed in our mission. And somewhere in federal prison, Julian Castro was spending his 10th year of incarceration, watching from a distance as the woman he'd tried to diminish built an empire of empowerment from the ashes of his cruelty. When I took the stage to speak, I looked out at the faces gathered, women who'd rebuilt their lives, who'd reclaimed their worth, who'd become magnificent, and I felt the weight of that night 10 years ago finally lift. 10 years ago, I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. A man told me I used to be pretty. He meant it as an insult, a way to diminish me, to make himself feel powerful by making me feel small. And it worked, for a moment. I believed him. I felt the shame he intended me to feel. I paused, finding Nikolai's eyes in the crowd, drawing strength from the love I saw there. But that moment of shame became the catalyst for everything that followed. For finding real love instead of settling for someone who needed to diminish me to feel superior. For bringing my daughter into the world. For building this foundation that has helped thousands of women reclaim their worth. I looked at the women gathered, seeing Rebecca, who'd finished her nursing degree and now ran a clinic for underserved communities. Claire, who was 3 years into a successful tech career and mentored other formerly incarcerated women. Dozens of others whose stories had become interwoven with mine. So, to Julian Castro, wherever he is, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being cruel enough to push me away from a life that would have made me small. Thank you for showing me exactly who you were before I wasted more years believing in who I hoped you'd be. Thank you for being so publicly terrible that the man who would become my husband felt compelled to claim me, to protect me, to love me in ways you never could. The ballroom erupted in applause, women standing and cheering, and I felt tears streaming down my face, not of sadness or shame, but of triumph, of completion, of absolute certainty that every painful moment had been necessary to become who I was meant to be. I used to be pretty, I finished, my voice rising above the applause. Diminished, uncertain, trying to be what someone else wanted me to be. Now I'm magnificent. And so is every woman in this room who refused to let someone else's opinion define her worth. We are all magnificent, and no one can take that from us ever again. As I stepped down from the stage, Nikolai swept me into his arms, kissing me deeply while Nadia made exaggerated gagging sounds, and the crowd cheered. And in that moment, surrounded by the family I'd chosen, and the community I'd built, and the life I'd claimed despite every obstacle, I understood with perfect clarity that Julian's cruelty hadn't broken me. It had freed me to become more than I'd ever dreamed possible. And that was the greatest revenge of all. Not destroying my enemy, but building a life so magnificent that his opinion became meaningless, his memory irrelevant, his cruelty transformed into the catalyst for more good than he'd ever done in his entire life. 10 years ago, he'd told me I used to be pretty. He was right. I had been. Now I was so much more.